All right, today I'm going to go over, as I mentioned, I'm going to go over all three of these chapters, and I did want to mention something to you. Let's see, where is it? I think I've got it. Come on, come on, come on. There we go. It appears as
Okay,
though
folks.
that when
Just
Evan gives his lectures, I don't know how he does them different than I do, but his lectures seem to average an hour and a half, where a lot of times I will go over the same material in between a half an hour and an hour. That doesn't mean his are better than mine are better than his. It means mine are shorter than his. So it's possible his are more complete than mine are. I don't know. I try to give you everything that's in the chapter. But the point is, you might want to go if you're having trouble with any of this stuff, and not even maybe right now. I mean, I realize you get enough homework, etc. But the point is, um, next semester you're going to be doing C#, all right? And you're going to forget all this stuff. I'm just telling you, it's just natural. And I don't mean every single 100% of it, but you're going to forget the majority of it. Then come fall, we're going to be going into Node.js, where the first thing we're going to do is go back into JavaScript. So, you for one thing, again, this is my opinion. You do what you want to do. It's your life. It's your money, etc. I would strongly suggest keeping your book. All right, because one thing that we're going to do in fall, what I plan on doing, is going over the last part of the book in fall and go over it in some depth and breadth of coverage. All right, and if you don't have the book, no, all kidding aside, that's going to make it harder for you. I mean, that should just make sense. But we will go over, especially like browser objects, cookies, and web storage, creating your own objects, closures, the module pattern, etc. So we will be going over that stuff. Now, so far in this book, we've gone over chapters 1 to 5. You've had 2 tests. Next week, we're going to go over chapters 6 and 7. You already know this, that Wednesday of next week, there will be no class. So the plan right now is on Monday of next week, we will go over chapter 6 and also do some examples. All right, Tuesday we'll go over chapter 7 and we'll do some examples. All right, Wednesday there's no class. Probably I'm going to wait till Thursday to go over your tests. Now, if I get them graded this weekend, I'll put the grades out there and I'll let you see them, but I don't want to go over it until we have some time. All right, and then my hope is that also on Thursday I can give you some kind of a pre-test. All right, I'm not saying we'll have the test next Friday. We'll see. I'm probably leaning towards the following week on Monday. All right, just so you know that. And this you might find to be, harder than the test you took yesterday. I don't know. All right. So then we get back, and then we're almost like into Thanksgiving week. I think we got a week and then Thanksgiving week. I'm going to do as much of the stuff that's in here as I can between now and Thanksgiving. Why? Because after Thanksgiving, we only have about 3 weeks. And one of those weeks I want to spend on us refining the portfolio. All right? Okay, so today the plan is to go over and probably lecture on all 3 of these chapters. And the way I do this, just so you know, is I will lecture on Chapter 13. When I get done, I'm just going to stop taping, save that tape, start producing it, and then start taping, doing the one for Chapter 14. So the idea today is we'll go over Chapter 13, which is on numbers, strings, and dates. We'll go over Chapter 14, which is on control structures, exceptions, and regular expressions. And we'll go over Chapter 16, which is on arrays. And tomorrow, we will look at a couple of program examples. I'm going to give you code, and we will look at those. You will not be tested on any of the material on 13, 14, or 16. You will not be given any homework, labs, tests, written tests, nothing. So again, my hope, my reason for going over these 3 chapters is hopefully it'll help some of the earlier stuff, it'll help it make more sense. Now, if in the book, if in these 3 chapters they go in and they show examples and they say, and this uses jQuery to do this, I'm not going to go over that because we haven't discussed jQuery yet. So my goal is to hit you with some of the ideas about numbers, strings, dates, etc. in this chapter, but not to overwhelm you with so much information that it doesn't make sense. All right, I think I gave you this. Now I got to find it, and if you know my file system here, you know what a joke this is. Let's see. well, I'll have to grab it from here then. Okie dokie. So the other day, what is going on here? Let's see, there we go. The other day, I sent you all an email. I think I did. And if I didn't, I'll send it back out today. All right, so let's see. Well, the point is, I gave you on that email, and if I didn't, I'll resend it. But let's see if I can find it from here. This used to be the site. It was called hunlock.com, and it had a huge tutorial on it on dates, a huge tutorial on it on numbers, on arrays, etc. Well, you can see right now they've taken it offline. So I found the archived URL for it, and I will make sure you've got that by the end of class today. Okay? All right, let's just go through the chapter. So I'm going to jump first into Chapter 13. All right. So it says in Chapter 2, we learn the basic skills for working with this stuff. Now there's other stuff. Now, a couple things. First of all, a couple of the things that are in here I've already shown you, such as, if you remember, I did show you a long time ago math.round, which just rounds a number. You all know how that works. All right. There's one that's called math.floor. With math.floor, any number low. So let's say I've got the number 12.4. Math.floor says if it's less than 0.5, you round down. So 12.499999999 would be 12. 12.5, you understand what I'm saying? So there's a math.floor and a math.ceil. A CEIL, I believe it is, for ceiling. And you can use those. That's one of the ones that we'll look at in here. There's a math.random, that if you were going to go in and you were going to create random numbers, it's what you'd use. All right. Historically, in the past, back in the day when I was, basically teaching my own stuff as opposed to teaching the stuff that they've come up with, I would have us do things like, do a number guessing game, and it's really not hard to do. You tell the person to enter a number between 1 and 100 type of an idea. Okay. What they do in here is they do this game called Pig, and there's not that many pages on it, but they'll go through that, and they'll go through a countdown application. In the countdown application, I believe it says how many days between now and New Year's. Well, you're all smart enough to realize you could plug in any holiday date in there. So if you wanted to know how many days it was till next Halloween, for example, you could plug in October 31st, 2021, something like that. Okay? So we'll talk about numbers, we'll talk about strings, and we'll talk about dates and times. All right. So, a couple things in here. Now notice number, they all start with number dot. So that means there is a built-in JavaScript class. And a class is it's a bunch of stuff, it's a bunch of code that's available to you. And there's max.value, as it says, that's the largest positive number that can be represented. That's not infinity. Because how do you write infinity? All right? And there's the largest positive and there's the largest negative that you can see in there. Well, then there is infinity and negative infinity, but notice the bottom one. That's the only one that really matters for what we're doing. If we were doing things that were really dealing with super humongous big or small numbers, then this stuff would matter a lot. But with what we're doing, the key one is, do you understand number.nan? And you do. All right, because you've been using it. All right. So notice here it says if you do 0 divided by 0, it displays NaN, not a number. If you do 10 divided by 0, it displays infinity. Again, JavaScript is unique in this way, in that most programming languages try to actually do that calculation. They try to calculate infinity, and either they lock up or they give you an error message, and the program just stops right there. JavaScript does not do that. All right? The toFixed, you already know about. All right, if you want to set something up so it's toFixed to a certain number of digits. Notice here there is a toString method as well. All right, so why would you ever want to use toString? If you want to take a number and you don't want to use it as a number, you want to be able to use it as a string, you can run the toString method on it. All right, with what we're doing, that's not really that big a thing. So You cannot test for equality with NaN. In fact, if you've got two values that are both NaN and you ask if they're equal to one another, it'll say they're not. Because NaN is just basically, for lack of better words, it's an unknown value. It's not null, but it's not a number. All right? As it says, division 0 by 0 results in NaN, but anything else divided by 0 gives you either infinity or negative infinity. And then finally, again, to string with no parameters, it says it's used implicitly whenever JavaScript needs to convert a number to a string. So when it needs to do that, it just does it. All right? Okay. So here are some of those properties and methods that I mentioned before. Pi, if you were doing work where you had to figure out diameter of a circle or whatever, or something like that, you could do that. And notice it does bring it out to probably that's a dozen or so places. All right? But the ones that you're going to use most often, rather, are these here. And some of these, again, I've already hit on, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. All right? The math.abs, I think I've given examples like this before. If I say, hey, I'm 63 years old, and if I say, Gabriel, how old are you? And he says, I'm 21. You'd agree there's 42 years between us. And it really doesn't matter if I say 63 minus 21 or 21 minus 6. It's the same thing. So when the difference doesn't matter as far as the negative number means no sense, you oftentimes use ABS for absolute value. Okay? The round, again, if the decimal part is 0.5 or above, you round it up. Otherwise, you round it down. The ceiling and the floor, all right? Ceiling, maybe I even didn't put it very well, because what ceiling typically does is it'll just remove everything. In other words, ceiling will bump it up to the next number. So even if it's 12.000001, I think ceiling will bump it up to 13. And floor, even if it's 9999999, I believe it'll bump it down. If it's 12.9999, it'll bump it down to 12. All right? The POW, just so you know, in other programming languages, if I do this, if I say var x equal 2, and let's say that I want, let x equal 2, let y equal, in other languages you can say x and that means raise it to the power of 3, so that means 2 cubed. I believe that now with EX6 you can also do that in JavaScript. So in other words, you don't have to use math.pow anymore. But if you otherwise, and know this works, if I said let y equals math.pow x3, that will work. That is 2 cubed. But this should work as well, just so you know that. You can try it if you care. Then there's square root. These two are kind of neat. Min and max. Notice returns the largest number from its parameters. You can pass in almost anything and it'll grab the biggest one or the smallest one. All right? And they give you some examples of all these. Okay? Oh, here's what I guess I should have went down further on the page. So you can use it. All right? And they even use the same example I did, basically. So, all right. Generating a random number, again, that's really important typically too in things like games. All right, if you want to, if you are writing yourself a game and you want to make sure that you start in a random spot on the screen, let's say, something like that. All right, so it's math.random. The way that virtually every random number function works, this is an FYI for you, is it returns a number that's greater than or equal to 0, but is less than 1. So it goes from 0 to 0.9999999 almost forever. All right? And then it's up to you. If you want a whole number, then you've got to convert that into an integer. And they show you how to do it in here. But math.random gives you a number in that range, greater than or equal to 0, but less than 1. All right? So when you do this, it might give you a number like, for example, 0.8763245. All right? And then if you take that number, there's different things that you can do. For example, you can multiply it by 100, and you can use the math.floor, the math.ceiling, and you can do things that way. And that's the way some people do it. All right? So notice again, there is an integer between 0 and max minus 1. Well, how did you get that? You use the floor function. All right, so if you want 0 to be within the range, So if I wanted a number, if I said enter a number between 0 and 99, I would set max here to 99, and then this would work. What if I didn't want that? What if I didn't want it to be between 0 and 99? I wanted it to be between 1 and 100. Are you with me? All I'd have to do, I could use this calculation right here. Then when I got done, I could say plus 1. That way, if it gave me a 0, that would become 1. If it gave me a 99, it would become 100. That's the way a lot of people write these things, just so you know. All right. There's return an integer. This is another way of doing it. Get random number. Notice that all of these are the math.random function, and this is get random number. So there's different ways that you can do this. And one thing that appears to happen over time is whoever is in charge of, ECMA, the European Computer Manufacturers Association, or whomever is in charge of this stuff, they try to make it easier all the time for programmers. All right? So this is that pig game. I'm not going to go through it, but let's just quickly look at the rules if you're interested. This is one of those things, I don't know about you, but when I was a little kid, well, it was totally different than you guys. We didn't have internet, etc. But like we would play card games a lot. We would play War. Maybe you played that. But I remember my brother and I playing War, and it would last a week. And it would seem like it would never end. And my little brother, he was not so little. He's bigger than I am. And he usually was around my size, so it eventually would end in a fight anyway. All right? But this is the reason I'm telling you that is that's kind of what you've got here in this pig game. Notice the first player to 100 points wins. You take turns rolling your die. The turn ends when you roll a 1. If you roll a 1, you lose all the points that you earned during that turn. So the idea is not to get a 1, right? So the idea is if I want to play this, I want to do 16 times and then get a 4 and be done. What are the chances of that? All right. So this is one of those games that, again, could last almost forever when you take a look at the rules. So they have you do this, and they have 2 players. And what they're doing in here is when they say to roll, what is it doing? It's giving you a random number, correct? And it'll give you a random number between 1 and 6. All right, and then you will add that here. But you also have to program it in that if I've got 37 points and I get a 6, and then I get a 6, and then I get a 6, and then I get a 1, I lose those 18 points that I've added. Does all that make sense? So that's what they program in here. The HTML is not difficult. My guess is every one of you could do this. All right, you could do, you could add the CSS and make it look pretty, etc. All right, you'll notice they've got a bunch of IDs in here, and then they give you the JavaScript. Well, right now you are to the point where hopefully when you start to look at this stuff, and I'm not going to go through it in much depth or breadth of coverage, but you should be able to make some sense out of what's going on in there. That's what's important to me. All right, so you look in here. All right, so math.random, random max. Okay, so someplace in here, my guess is where they've got this random plus 1, you probably set max to 5. All right, and then you add 1 to it here, so it's going to give you a number between 1 and 6. All right, change player. Well, if it's one person's turn and you want to go to the other person's turn, okay. The point is, when you're doing this, you want to make sure you're adding points to the right person, correct? Or if that person gets a 1, that you are removing those points from the right person. Okay, so that's what we're doing in here. All right, there's a thing in here called roll. When it gets to focus, that means basically, you're getting ready to roll the die for that one. Here's what happens when you get a new game. If it's a new game, basically, if you look in here, what are we doing? We're initializing everything to 0. All right, there's some stuff in here, this turn.add class. This is the jQuery, so I'm not going over any of that stuff. This is what happens when you roll. So again, it's going to give you a random number between 1 and 6. If it's 1, you're resetting your total back to 0, and you're telling it next player goes. Otherwise, you're going to add that to the person's total. All right? And here is if you say, I'm done. You want to stop right there. So what do you have to do? You have to change turns, correct? Player 1 was playing, now it's player 2, or vice versa. That's it. not really a lot of code when you look at it. All right. Now, when you're in your 4th semester, it's sort of an aside, but there's a tie-in here. One of the things you do in the 4th semester is you create your own Android app. All right. I had a guy last semester who loved Yahtzee, and he made Yahtzee. He did it as an Android app, and it was pretty good what he did. Okay, the scoring and stuff appeared to work. I played it for a while, and he published it, and at least he told me put it out there. I didn't check that it's out on the Google Play Store. All right, so that's quickly on numbers. So let's jump into strings. If you plan on becoming a programmer, I don't care if you're going to program for websites or you're going to be an application programmer where you're writing applications in C#, from this program, or in Java, for example, from this program, you need to understand how to work with strings. Even in regular HTML, you need to understand how to work with strings. Again, JavaScript is unique in that you could put string values in single quotes or in double quotes. In most other programming languages, strings go into double quotes. If you want to use single quotes, that means that's just a single character. All right? And one thing I've always been taught is really you should be consistent. So I know a lot of people that when they program anything in a string in JavaScript, they always put it in double quotes because they're used to doing that from other languages. All right? But again, consistency is the key. All strings have a length property, which is the number of characters. So as you see right here, JavaScript, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 10 characters in the word JavaScript. If you'd have said space JavaScript space, it would give you 12. It counts every character. All right? All right. The charat we've already looked at. Hopefully you at least have some kind of an understanding of that. If I want to be able to pluck out, technically what charat allows you to do is if I go in and I create for myself, if I say here, let greeting equal hello. All right, you can already tell that the length of that will be 5. You won't get that. What you can do with the string methods is you can say, you know what? Greeting 0 equals H E L L O. So I can say greeting 1, greeting 2, greeting 3, and greeting 4. So the reason I'm showing you that, not to waste my time or yours, but to let you know that when you're working with this stuff, when you start to work with string methods, you can grab individual characters out of a string, or if you've got a very huge string, you can grab a substring. And I've talked about that before. I'm not going to run through these. Some of them pretty much should make sense to you. A concat allows you to glue stuff together. But when you look in here at index of substring, 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 etc., they're all allowing you to go through a string to find out if it holds a string inside of that. And they all do. And the difference between these is, do you give it a start value and an end value? Do you start from the beginning and go to the end and just show me the first one? Do you start from the end and go to the beginning and just show me the last one? Do you want to show me all of them? That's the differences between these. And again, I will get you that Hunlock thing. And once I do, it has a big thing in there on strings. All right? The 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase, I'm taking for granted those just make sense to people. All right? So, one thing I like about this book, and Evan and I have gone back and forth, Evan actually likes the HTML, CSS book. He doesn't like the book you're in right now. The reason he doesn't like the book that you're in right now is in the same chapter in the book, they not only discuss if statements, but they discuss loops, and he thinks they should be in their own chapters. All right? I don't disagree with him. All right? I think that, and in fact, one of the things that you're going to see in the next chapter is we're going to talk about a switch statement that Angie has seen because they have the same thing in C sharp, but the rest of you haven't seen it. It's another way to write an if. All right. I wish they wouldn't wait until almost the end of the book to show you that. All right. Okay. So how to trim spaces. There's other ways of doing this. So here's trimming spaces at the beginning. Here's trimming spaces at the end. Guess what? There's a function that's called trim that will do it for you automatically. But here they're writing their own. So kind of in the background, this is what's happening when you do that. Okay? You can compare strings. And notice, if you compare strings, these two by default will not be identical. Does that make sense to people? But if you take both of them and make them both uppercase or both lowercase, then you can compare them, and in that case, they would be equal to one another. All right? Okay. No, so notice there's an equal ignore case. All right? If you are writing yourself a program and you think to yourself, man, there must be some kind of a routine already to do this, then go look. There's nothing wrong with writing it yourself, but as the old saying goes, why reinvent the wheel? Go in there and take a look at W3 Schools or someplace else. Really probably developer.mozilla.org, because that's going to list all of the string methods, for example. All right. Then they go into dates and times. Now, we did a little bit of work with this on the test yesterday. Var now equal date. The word now has no significance. You could have said var date, little date equal date. It doesn't matter. All right, they're just calling it now. All right. Now, how appropriate for election day, okay? So how to create a date object, so you can put a string in there. And notice when you put a string in there, you can put just the date, or you can put the date plus the time. All right. And you do it using, basically you do it using military time. All right. So here they say how to create a date object by specifying date parts. And when you do this, it's not mandatory if you do it like this. So notice they set just the date. All right. And notice on this, because it looks weird, the first month is month 0. Because it's basically all held like a big array. And that can confuse people. If I said, what month were you born? And if you were born in January, month 0. No, it's not month 0. So you typically, when you want to display that, you'll always be adding 1 to it, type of an idea. All right, but you can set up and you can provide as much of this stuff as you want or as little of this stuff as you want. All right. It says here, some unexpected results when specifying a date string. All right. And it's got here, I don't know if this is even still true. Invalid date and 1916. All right. There's all sorts of things that you can work on too with locales, L-O-C-A-L-E, where you may or may not be aware of this, but the international separator for a date, we use hyphens or we use dashes. That's not the way it's used around the world. Typically they use periods. All right, and you can set it up like that too, if you want to do that. All right. So you can read that again if you're interested. One thing, as it says in JavaScript, it's not just JavaScript. In most languages, dates are represented by the number of milliseconds since midnight, January 1st, 1970. If you ever want to look that up, look up the Unix epoch time, E-P-O-C-H, and they explain why they use that particular time. All right. Again, month numbers start with 0, so January is 0, December is 11th. Says this allows these values to be used with arrays. Okay. The different methods with the date object. Well, you could take a date and convert it to a string. There's ways to convert strings to dates as well. All right, so you can go back and forth between these. Notice in here we've got two different kinds of routines. This, you're going to hear this, what I'm about to tell you for the next two or 3 minutes. You're going to hear the same thing when we get to talking about Java in semester 4. And that is, you have what are called getters and you have what are called setters. All right. I remember the first time, I think I've told you this, but I've got 3 daughters. They're all adopted. The first time that I saw my first daughter, it was the day after she was born. And we went to the hospital, and we went in there, and it just said, Baby Scott on the thing right there. And the nurse said, what's her name? And we said, it's going to be Taylor. So she immediately took that sticker off and put Taylor Scott on there, which was kind of neat that she did that. What was she doing right there? She was setting the name. Does that make sense? When she asked me what the name was going to be, and I told her, she was getting the name. So when you do a getter, all right, somebody is providing you information that already exists. All right, it's called an accessor, typically. When you do a setter, it's called a mutator because you are typically changing a value. So notice in here, I can grab from a date. This is all the different stuff I can grab. I'm not going to read any of that to you because, again, hopefully most of it that's in there makes sense to you. But you can pluck out any part of a date object that you want to. Also, you can go in and if you're setting a date, you can set virtually any of those parts that are in there. Most people, when they are either doing a get or a set, don't go to the milliseconds route. You know, it's just, it doesn't make sense. Even seconds doesn't make sense. All right? I'm dating myself here, but I always remember watching an old Beverly Hillbillies episode when Jed asked Jethro, what time is it? And he goes, in 3 seconds, it'll be 2:40. No, it's 2:40. You know, and it's like that. So typically, you know, it's like if I asked you the time right now, you would probably say, if you looked at the thing down here, it just turned to 8:37. You probably wouldn't say 8:37 in 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5, etc. And have how many hundreds of seconds. But sometimes, if you are doing scientific types of calculation, it may truly matter. All right? And it says there are complementary get and set methods with get UTC that work on the date object. And what it does by default, so unless you tell it otherwise, it grabs the time on your system clock. So that may or may not be that important, you know, whether you're off by a minute, but it's also grabbing the time zone from your clock. All right? So they give you some examples here of working with dates, and they show you, again, how you can display dates in different formats. All right, I'd already shown you before the test basically ways to display dates. All right, it was just one way to display dates, but there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Notice in here, they're literally adding padding. What do I mean? They are setting it up so that if the date is between the 1st and the 9th, instead of printing out as 1 to 9, it'll print out as 01 to 09. Do you want to do that? I don't know. Do you have to do that? I don't know. But a lot of people, when they create reports for people, they like those reports to be totally symmetrical. They like everything to line up. All right? So it could matter. All right? Here's an example here. How calculate the number of days until New Year's. You should be able to look at the time that's in here, and it should make some sense to you. I'm not saying a lot of sense, but it should make sense. And when they do these kinds of calculations, this right here, they look at the number of hours in a day, which is 24, the number of the number of hours in a day, the number of minutes in an hour, which is 60, and the number of seconds in a minute, which is 60. So I believe that's 24 times 60 times 60. And if you want milliseconds, you've got to multiply that by 1,000. All right, and I think that's how they get that number right there. All right. Now, the good news is typically you don't have to do that, but internally that's what the computer does. So they've got, again, this countdown application. As it says, I guess I thought it just did the new year, but it accepts an event name and a date. All right, and it's kind of neat. So if you wanted to know how many days it was till your birthday, you could put that in. Now, hopefully you get this, that if you come in here and you put your birthday and you put this year and you've already had your birthday, it's going to give you a negative number. That makes sense? All right. So you could check for that if you wanted to, and I don't know if they do it in here or not. Or you could decide that if it was a negative number, you did display it in red, and if it was not, you maybe displayed it in green or whatever. All right? And notice what they have. There's the event, there's the date, there's the countdown, there's the message. One thing that just, again, I'm just giving you this, I'm throwing this at you now, that notice they set IDs for all these. So we can use the document.getElement by ID or the $sign, right? When it comes to fall of next year and you're working with Node.js, these are fine. But you also want to add name equals and give it that name. Because when you use ID, it works on the client side. It works the JavaScript that we're doing right now. The JavaScript that we end up doing with Node.js in fall, that's server-side JavaScript. You learn how to use your own computer as both a client and as a server. All right, and then when we get that, then we push it out. We've done this already with GitHub Pages, but we use a different product called Heroku, where you create stuff and you put it out there and other people can use your application now. All right, so again, they give you the JavaScript here. And, you know, the one thing to look at with this, now you might look at that and say it's a lot. I'm sorry. I'm sure there's probably less than 50 lines of code there. All right, that's not really a lot. You know now, because you've heard this from me enough times, that you don't want to use var, you want to use let in there. The other thing, and this I'm just giving this to you because you're going to hear it starting in a couple weeks. This line right here, that says that what you're doing is using jQuery. And jQuery is just a JavaScript library. And in English, what this means is don't run this code until the document has been loaded into the browser. That's what it means. All right, then all this stuff can run. All right. And that's it. So again, I hope that you don't find that what I just went over with you was a waste of your time, but when you see this stuff, I like it where you at least have seen it. All right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this real quick, and I'm going to start the next one. It's 8:42. I will try to be cognizant of the clock, and when it gets to 8:55, I'm going to give you a break. All right? And we'll see how far we can get between now and then. So just hold.